So why am I sitting on the hood of this beautiful 1970s Dodge Challenger? Well, one reason. One reason only, and that's because of this. Driver, San Francisco. Obvious question first, just get that out of the way. Why are we back here?
Why we're back in San Francisco? The reason why we're back in San Francisco is because it's an original city from the first driver, so a little bit of history there, and obviously with the inspiration of the original game and this game being 70s Hollywood car chases, San Francisco is the most iconic Hollywood car chase city of all time. Bullitt, obviously, but others. But also because it's the most diverse city in America in terms of driving environments. So you've got obviously the hills around Russian Hills and so on, but you've also got fast, long, flowing driving roads. You've got dirt tracks. You know, for a US city, there's a lot of diversity in the driving.
Okay, now the game's been in development for 4 to 5 years, I heard you say in the presentation. Can we sort of talk about way back, right at the start of this? What were the ideas, what were the thoughts behind the next driver game? What did you want to achieve?
Well, going back the 5 years to the early concepting meetings for the game, the first thing that we established was that it was going to be a big comeback. So it needed a big team, needed a lot of time. This wasn't going to be a game. Thankfully for me, this is one of the reasons I came back, was it wasn't going to be a game that was going to have to be out in a year, and it was going to be, you know, just a... So that was the first starting point. The next thing that we wanted to do was to very much recapture the feeling of the original one. So that's typically the handling of the cars, that muscle car feeling, the big tail-out slides, power slides, drifting, and so on. Driver 1 was very much known for its feel and its handling, and that was one of the biggest things, was to really focus back on the core of what made that game feel so unique. And the third thing was that we wanted also to be innovative, because Reflections games, if you look at Stuntman and Destruction Derby and obviously Driver, they've always been innovative, and we wanted another level of innovation. And the previous games we dealt with getting out of the car and running around. We wanted something totally new, and the totally new thing was Shift. Shift being inspired by Google Earth, actually, the idea of seeing the world from above. Everything's happening, all the pedestrians are walking around, the cars are driving around, and you can be anyone in that city instantaneously.
And how authentic is this San Francisco to the real thing?
That's a question we get asked a lot, especially from people from San Francisco, because they want to know if their house is there, or if where their girlfriend works or whatever. And it's not absolutely accurate. One thing that we've learned over the many years of developing city-based driving games is if you try and too accurately represent the real city, you actually damage the gameplay. Especially when it comes to the distances involved in driving between two areas. So what we've done is we've taken San Francisco, the city, and we've compressed areas together. So the key areas are there, but the long drives between those areas have been compressed right down. You know, so you're not driving for an hour from one area of the city to the next. Obviously, you've got shifts, so you could shift around anyway. But we want everything to have that real sort of exhilarating feel. So there's a lot of artistic license used in designing it, but you know. And if you don't live in San Francisco and you look at it and you're just familiar with the city, it's pretty much there.
And like you said, no on foot this time around, in the car 100% all the time. How does that affect, or how do you keep the narrative flow going, and how does that affect plot structure?
It's definitely tricky to maintain plot flow and narrative when you're only in cars, because one of the balances we've had to do, of course, is how many cutscenes do we have? You know, the story needs to be progressed, but two guys in a car, it's not the most interesting thing to look at too much, so we have to balance that with the gameplay. And also some of the missions, you know, we can have missions that are extremely good fun to play, but they don't necessarily fit with the story, so that's why we have some separation there, and we have city missions and challenges and activities that are separate from the story. But any time you're in Tanner's car, obviously then you're progressing the story. So it's been a very we've very actively tried to balance that.
And we saw during the gameplay what we've had today that basically we'll see sort of impact from the real world on this dream world and through signposts and such. How do you progress that any further in the game? Will there be impact from the real world in the dream world?
Yes, I mean you've noticed the impact from the real world into his Coma. That becomes more acute as you get further through the game, and it becomes more obvious, and it becomes so obvious to the point that it's even obvious to Tanner that something is not quite right here. And it's part of the interest of playing the game is learning that and how that happens and when it happens. So I don't want to give away too much, but you've highlighted the billboards. The other thing is, if you saw a scene in the hospital there with the television running in the corner of the room, that scene isn't actually finished in the version you were playing, but you can get the feeling of what's on the news, on the TV news there, infiltrating Tanner's head.
And can we sort of touch upon multiplayer as well, if possible? Obviously, it's a single-player presentation here today, but can you sort of just go into what players can expect from the multiplayer?
Yeah, multiplayer's one of the things that we've spent a lot of time working on in the extra year or so that we've been developing the game is the multiplayer. We've added a substantial number of additional online modes. So we have, interestingly for a driving game, because of the shift, we can do all sorts of quite interesting things with it. We've got capture the flag type of games and tag games, as well as the usual races and chases. We also added a split screen mode, and the split screen mode is it's not online, it's just pure split screen, mixture of co-op games and competitive games. So there's a huge number of different online options.
And you also mentioned in the presentation about the tech behind the game. It's all built in-house. Can we sort of just get into that a little bit? Can you give us a few details?
Yes, it's the core tech that's built in-house. There are various rendering engines available off the shelf, physics engines that are quite well known and publicised. But what we've done is built those ourselves. So all built from the ground up, and the reason why we've had to do that is to hit the 60 frames per second that we're aiming for. Especially in this environment, a real open city, the size that the city is, with the number of cars driving around, because you'll notice that the density of traffic and pedestrians walking around is much higher than previous driver games or most other open world city driving games. And to get that into 60 frames, the only way you can do it is proprietary, and that takes a long time.
And talking about the cars and actually the shift function, obviously enough, we're seeing a few missions where you'll have to get the right car for the mission, or something, a good muscle car that will suit the mission. Once you jump out of the car you're in, how do you make sure that there's a good range, a good variety of cars and vehicles within, say, one block radius?
Well, we have again proprietary tech that deals with the spooling of vehicles. It's something we've got a lot of experience with all the way back to the first driver game. And what we do is we approach it slightly differently. We have a realistic spread of vehicles. So you'll notice that when you look around in the immediate vicinity, there's a selection of vehicles, but they all tend to be sort of fairly normal traffic type vehicles. But then occasionally you'll see something special. I mean, one of the problems we had in previous games is that you're driving from one zone to the next, and all of a sudden there's a huge batch of sports cars. They all come past, and then there's a load of jeeps that all come past you. And that's something we've worked hard to avoid. So you just need to be in the right area of the city. You need to be a bit patient sometimes, or you need to make a trade-off and say, right, okay, I'm not going to wait. How long am I going to wait for a Lamborghini? I'm not going to wait all day for it, but that one there will do, or this car here will do. So, it's all about having a realistic view of things and choosing what's available to you.
So, what research did you guys do? Is about you said over 140 licensed vehicles in the game. What sort of research did you guys do into picking which of those cars you wanted to go for?
That was actually quite easy because in terms of picking them, building them wasn't easy, but picking them was easy. It was a case of for a car to get into Driver San Francisco, it had to just tick one box, and that was be iconic. And that can be iconic for a number of reasons. It can be because it's a incredible sports car, obviously, but we haven't gone for the obvious choices. There's cars in there that are realistic in a city environment. There's cars in there that are in there because they were famous from a movie car chase. I mean, if you can think of any movie car chase, TV car chase, chances are that vehicle is in the game, and that leads to some really quite bizarre stuff, or even things that you might think are boring, like a 1974 Dodge Monaco, for example. Well, that's the car that was typically a cop in movies like The Blues Brothers from that era. So not a car you'd normally expect to find in a driving game, but when you really think about the inspiration for the game, 70s car chases, it's absolutely right that that car is in there, and you'll find a lot of interesting cars in there that you've never seen in a driving game before.
Okay. And just sort of in wrapping up, you feel like this is the definitive driver? You feel like you've achieved everything you've set out to do?
I feel like we've more than achieved everything we set out to do. I don't feel it's the definitive driver, because the definitive driver is always going to be closer and closer and closer to the realism of a Hollywood movie car chase, and it can always be more realistic, and there can always be a more photorealistic looking environment. It can but that requires more power. What I can tell you is we've absolutely maxed out what we can do with these machines.
Thank you very much indeed for the time. Guys, that's Driver San Francisco, so out in September.